This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks resumed gains today. We saw MSCI's index of emerging market equities jumping 0.9%, with stock markets in India amongst those leading the gains. A brighter global mood has, of course, lifted the index by more than 11% in November, putting it on a course for its best performance since 2018. Now, across Africa, markets were mostly muted today. South Africa's JSE was lifted a little by an upbeat corporate earnings report from retail firm Mr. Price. Of course, investors were excited when the firm announced it was buying value fashion retailer Power Fashion in its first purchase since the 1990s at a transaction cost that would be 4% of its market cap. Now, also coming up on today's show, Zimbabwe begins repossessing underutilized farms and withdrawing land from multiple farm owners. Tanzania Airports now fitted with ATM machines that can issue foreign currency. And Uganda's interstate buses resume operations, but traffic is worryingly low. Well, let's start off today's bulletin in Zimbabwe, where the government has begun repossessing underutilized farms and withdrawing land from multiple farm owners as it aims to enhance food security in the country. This follows a government plan to implement the one-man, one-farm policy that seeks to ensure landless Zimbabweans can be allocated some land. CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya has more on that report.
Vast swaths of farmland parceled out to beneficiaries during the 2000s have been lying idle, reducing agricultural production and diminishing the important sector's contribution to the economy. The government has begun repossessing those farms from unproductive, absentee or multiple owners and will allocate them to thousands of people on a lengthy waiting list at the land's office.
If it is done in the sense and in the light of trying to improve food security or improve production, then the process is viewed as a very noble one by our organization, and we are fully behind such a development. There has to be some rethinking in terms of how we can make the land more productive. And even if it means revisiting some of the processes, so be it, because what we need to do is to ensure that land becomes productive.
Agricultural production has been hampered since 2000 due to contestations over the land grabs, which has seen some resettled farmers failing to access crucial finance. Farmers who are constrained by a lack of capital are allowed to engage in joint ventures with investors to get their operations up and running. However, in new guidelines issued by government, those sort of partnerships now need to be approved by the Ministry of Agriculture. Stakeholders insist the reallocation must be backed by attractive investment policies.
If you do not provide the environment, policy and otherwise, if you don't provide that environment for environment which is conducive for production and productivity to kick in, you then end up having these reverse issues, the negatives, where land lies idle, where people grab land from each other, disputes all over, and also you have a limit to which you can finance your operations, be it at government level or even at an individual level. With the security on the farms in question, even mobilizing local investment becomes quite a challenge.
To try to improve efficiency, Zimbabwe has also put a limit on farm sizes, and in July it agreed to pay $3.5 billion to former white farmers as compensation for infrastructure improvements on the land as part of efforts to win back international support. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
And still in the country, Zimbabwe's Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube has presented the 2021 national budget. Now, many in the country were expecting the government to dump its traditional bias towards security ministries and allocate more to social services sectors. Well, Farai himself joins us now in Harare. Let's find out more about that budget. Farai, great to have you on the show as always. Now, while the last budget was more focused on economic stabilization programs, this one was expected to target growth initiatives as well as the social service sector. Now, what are the highlights of this budget this time around? And paint us a picture of the fiscal situation the government presented in this budget.
Well, indeed, Uche, the focus this time is on sustainable and inclusive growth, building on the stability that fiscal authorities say has been created over the last couple of years. And I think key highlights is that the finance minister expects the economy to rebound after 2 years of decline. 7.4% growth projected on the back of significant growth in agriculture, in tourism, in manufacturing, and in mining. In terms of fiscal space, obviously still very limited. Expenditures will exceed revenues, but the debt to GDP ratio will start to come down on the back of measures such as, greater and tighter control on procurement, procurement to be done only for budgeted expenditure and through, prescribed and laid down procedures. There will also be a reduction in terms of government expenditure, particularly in staff, in terms of its staff and its employees, as it tries to manage its expenditure in that regard. Also, there will be enhancement of tax systems and tax collection, all in a bid to try and increase its revenue and ensure that it balances this budget. That is the key challenge, I think, to manage expenses, to live within its means, which has been a challenge in the past, and obviously there is a need to spend a bit more to get the economy ticking again, especially post-COVID. So it will be a tough one, but I think very realistic in terms of what has been laid down, and many people here are quite optimistic.
Well, let's delve a little deeper into that. Given the impact COVID-19 has had on the economy and of course on tax revenues for the government, how exactly is Treasury going to balance this budget? Is it going to be at the expense of workers this time, workers' salaries this time around? And how are Zimbabweans responding to this budget?
Well, I think the workers' salary issue that you mentioned is quite pertinent, because I think for most of 2020, the key theme here has been industrial actions. There's been, strikes in the education sector, in the medical sector. Civil servants have been clamoring and calling for salary adjustments and increments, saying that their earnings have been eroded by inflation and just the rising cost of living. So I think while government is trying to manage its particularly staff costs and to lower its expenditure, I think there also be some measures that have been put in place that might please the employees and the workers. Tax-free thresholds have been increased, so employees will be able to take a bit more money home with them. There have also been measures, I think, that have stabilized inflation, that have stabilized the exchange rate. Inflation is expected to end the year 2021 at below 150%. So with that level of stability, Zimbabweans will be able to plan a bit better. They will be able to restore some of the power, some of their buying power, and that will be able to give some comfort to those employees who have had to tighten their budgets for the last couple of years. But indeed, yes, the government needs to balance those books, and I think that's why there is this mix of trying to incentivize production, trying to support value chains, but at the same time also realizing that the room that it has to participate in that is very limited, and so there will be a requirement to try and clear its arrears and win back some international investment to support the growth that is foreseen and projected.
Now, the government did announce an over $200 million stimulus package in May this year. Any new initiatives for COVID-19 in this budget, which of course will help to stem the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, indeed, I think not just COVID-19, but in general, there have been some incentives that have been put forward to try and increase domestic production, to try and support local industries. There have been rebates and tax holidays extended to manufacturers. Manufacturers of fertilizer will have a rebate. Manufacturers of leather products, the dairy industry, they've been given tax holidays. There've also been an extension in terms of duty-free, allowances for players in the tourism industry, all to try and incentivize them and to help them get back on their feet. There have also been funds, empowerment funds that have been extended to youths, to women, and to war veterans, also to try and get them to participate in terms of empowerment and in the economy. And all this is because government is aiming, it says that about 150,000 jobs, it looks, might be recovered post-COVID. Jobs that were lost due to COVID, those incomes and livelihoods will be recovered in 2021 on the back of these efforts that it is trying to make to get these industries ticking again, to try and domesticate production, to support local production, and to save foreign currency, reduce its expenditure on imports, and try to maximize domestic production to save those revenues.
Well, that certainly sounds like lots of positive news coming out of Zimbabwe. Many thanks for your insights there, Farai. That, of course, is Farai Mwakutuya joining us there in Harare. Well, let's move on now to Tanzania. The country's airports and border entry points will now issue foreign currency after being fitted with new compatible ATM machines. Now, the currency exchange ATM machine introduced by NMB Bank is a new development in the country's forex dealings. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with the details.
For the first time ever, travelers to and from Tanzania can now exchange euros, dollars or pounds at the country's 3 main international airports, thanks to the new automated teller machine service launched in Dar es Salaam.
This service has given us a solution to access forex easily, especially after the closure of forex bureaus in the country. The government, through the Central Bank of Tanzania, had asked commercial banks to help ensure forex services are easily available.
The ATM machines are being fixed at the Julius Nyerere International Airport, the Kilimanjaro International Airport, and the Amani Karume International Airport in Zanzibar. In 2019, the central bank cracked down on irregularities in the foreign exchange sector, which among other things led to a number of bureau de change operations being suspended and the subsequent passing of the foreign exchange bureau de change regulations of 2019. The central bank says the closure of bureaus in 2019 has helped resolve problems of tax evasion, money laundering, and other illegal transactions, and they believe foreign exchange services over the ATM will increase convenience and safety.
Sometimes you need money and banks are closed and you may struggle, but with a machine like this one, you can serve yourself in safety.
For now, the ATM machines will be limited to only 3 international currencies: the US dollars, the euro and pound sterling, and the local Tanzanian shilling.
We are mainly going to concentrate within the main airports. But then again, as the usage, as we see an uptick, of course, we will then deploy into all other strategic, like tourist areas and even shopping malls. Who knows?
Customers will exchange up to $2,000 at a given time. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
And let's now take a look at our corporate headlines today. Kenya's KCB Group has signed a deal with Atlas Mara Limited to purchase stakes in its banking units in Rwanda and Tanzania. Now, under the proposed deal, KCB says it will acquire a 62% stake in Bank Popular de Rwanda and a 100% stake in African Banking Corporation Tanzania. The transaction is subject to obtaining shareholder and regulatory approvals in Rwanda and Tanzania. And Africa's biggest bank by market value, First Rand, has experienced a better than anticipated recovery, and that's after payrolls recovered to pre-coronavirus levels. This resulted in fees and commissions strongly rebounding. The lender says its credit loss ratio also improved from 1.91% reported for the 6 months to June. The stock reversed earlier losses to trade 0.7% higher. And ExxonMobil and Total are in talks over liquefied natural gas projects in Mozambique. Both firms are seeking to extract more gas from a shared field that straddles the two developments and cut costs. The talks also involve the Mozambican government as it has to give final approval to any new agreement. And workers at Amazon's Staten Island Fulfillment Center have completed the sorting of packages ahead of Thanksgiving holidays, Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Amazon's spokesperson, Kate Scarpa, says this year's holiday shopping season will be nothing like in previous years due to the coronavirus pandemic. Americans are expected to spend an estimated $160 billion on gifts during the current quarter, and that's up 5% from the previous year. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're going to take a short break now, still coming up on the show. Trucks queue for kilometers at the Kenya-Uganda border as delays remain unresolved. And South Africa's Kangna's wind farm gets commissioned.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Now, a new travel restriction imposed on 15 African nations by outgoing U.S. President Donald Trump has sparked anger and disappointment in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The measure requires tourist and business travelers from countries with high overstay rates to pay a bond of up to $15,000 in order to visit the U.S. The rule applies to nationals of the DRC, Eritrea, Sudan, and Libya, amongst others. Here's CGTN's Chris Ochamringa with more from Kinshasa.
The U.S. State Department has tightened visa access to nearly 24 nations, including 15 African countries whose nationals have a record of overstaying their visas. The countries include Angola, Burundi, Chad, Liberia, Sudan, Djibouti, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Tourists and business travelers from the DRC and the other countries will now have to pay a bond of up to $15,000 to be allowed to visit the U.S. The exact amount will be determined by the consular officer and based on the circumstances of the visa applicant. The new measure has upset many Congolese citizens.
That's insane. That doesn't make any sense at all. And if someone wants really to stay in America, $15,000, they could care less about that. But that's not fair. You don't do that to people. And that's singling out, again, the black community. the African community, and that's not representative of America.
My heart is full of anger because of the decision of the U.S. government. It's a very bad decision. I read the statement of the U.S. ambassador to the DRC on Twitter, where he tried to downplay it. It's really unfortunate.
The new requirement will take effect on December 24th and runs until June 24th next year. Outgoing U.S. President Donald Trump made tightening immigration controls a focus of his term in office, and the U.S. State Department said the bond is meant to act as a deterrent to anyone trying to stay in the U.S. longer than their visa allows. In 2017, he issued a travel ban for immigrants from Muslim-majority countries like Libya, Somalia, and Chad that sparked anger among nationals of those countries. The incoming president, Joe Biden, has said he would revoke the travel ban on his first day in office. The U.S. foreign policy in the DRC is focused on supporting the country fight corruption, uphold democratic processes, and effective governance. The relationship between the two countries improved significantly after DRC President Felix Tshisekedi took office last year. But many in the DRC see the new visa regulation measures as a setback. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Meanwhile, the African Union is set to discuss the launch of a payment system for the long-awaited African Continental Free Trade Area. But the outbreak of the coronavirus presents a hurdle at this crucial launch point, with traditional cross-border trade routes facing the pressure of extended delays. Now, truckers at Kenya's western border crossing into Uganda and the Great Lakes region have been waiting for days before clearance, exposing the challenges of the continent's free trade area set to start in January 2021.
A queue of lorries snaked down the narrow tarmac road, stretching back as far as the eye can see, on both sides of a sign welcoming you to Busia, the gateway of East and Central Africa. Busia is part of a transport corridor that extends from Kenya's port of Mombasa into landlocked nations in East and Central Africa, including Rwanda, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Before the pandemic, it took truckers a few hours to cross over. Now, it takes days.
Since I came here, today is the third day here. We have been here on this queue now. And the queue moves at night a bit, but during the day it stops completely, it stalls. The vehicles are like this. And where we are here, as you can see, there is no sanitary equipment.
To cross over, drivers need to show a negative COVID-19 test taken in the previous 14 days, failure to which they must submit to testing at the border and wait for 2 days for the results. The added time comes out of their pay.
I'm having less money because if they give you, let me say that just like $400 to go to Mombasa, and you stay here for so long, you spend a lot of money for eating, even drinking.
Kenya's Finance Minister Uche Okoronkwo said the snarl-ups would ease once the approach road to Busia was turned into a dual carriageway, a project due for completion by 2022.
And you sleep on the trucks because they are not allowed you to go outside because of corona. So they want you to stay on the truck and you cook on the truck. But the toilet, you just arrange yourself. You can go to the petrol station or anywhere.
Over 50 African nations are due to operationalize the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement in January. The date was pushed back by 6 months due to the pandemic, and the increased border checks in the interim have also added to the wait. The ACFTA Secretariat had no immediate comment about the increased border checks. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Now, Kenya's economy is projected to contract by between 1% and 1.5% in 2020. That's according to the World Bank. Kenya's Treasury Cabinet Secretary, Ukuru Yatani, however, sees a growth of 0.6%. Now, both projections are a result of the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the global and domestic economy. It is part of the conversation I had earlier with Uche Pape, an economist from the World Bank. I started by looking at the impact of the pandemic on the country in the second quarter of this year.
Fortunately, we do have a rapid response phone survey in the field that actually probes and asks respondents exactly what the impacts are of the crisis. And so we can track this over time. And what we see is that while at the beginning of the crisis, the containment measures imposed by the government were very strict, we also saw that economic activities therefore got disrupted quite strongly. But then later in the summer, we saw that the containment measures were relaxed, and so also economic activity recovered to some extent. So by far, we are not yet at a full recovery, and it's also not clear whether this is going to happen in the next couple of weeks, because at the same time, we also do see that the number of new cases per day are actually increasing. So we are in the middle of a second wave. And I think at the moment, it's really hard to predict, and there's a lot of uncertainty how it's going to go and evolve further.
Right. Well, specifically, how did we see households shifting their investments and their spending patterns in response to the scale of the job and income losses, which of course were caused by this pandemic?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So what we see is that a lot of households, they lost work and they worked reduced hours, had reduced earnings. Micro businesses as well as household businesses actually also saw reduced sales and therefore reduced earnings. And so all of this, of course, affects very strongly the livelihoods of households. And how did they deal with this? We see that most households actually dealt with it either by reducing consumption or by tapping into savings. And often what we see is that less vulnerable households, they actually have access to savings and can use them to basically bring them over the crisis. However, the most vulnerable households, what they actually do is they reduce food consumption as well as selling assets. And both of those are really problematic. Let me quickly say something about the reduced food consumption. This basically means that adults, and often, and we see this in the survey, also children have to skip meals. And this means that we go much further towards malnutrition, and we can also see that food insecurity is actually on the rise. And this, exactly for children, can have really lasting effects on human capital, on like their learning capabilities and learning opportunities. And that's something that really strongly needs to be mitigated. In terms of the sale of assets, it's also very problematic because sometimes the sale of an asset of a house, for example, of a plow to use in the field, can really diminish any future incomes. And so if households have to sell their assets, it means that they can't recover swiftly after the crisis recedes, but instead they're going to be trapped in poverty for much longer. And so therefore, this is also something that needs to be avoided and mitigated against.
Well, on that note, and of course, given what we know about income mobility in Kenya, how long do you think that it will take for these 2 million newly poor people in the country to be able to recover? That's, of course, assuming a benign tax environment.
Yeah, that's also an excellent question. So what we actually say in the report is that these additional 2 million poor people, this wipes out the progress in poverty reduction of the last 5 years. So this means if we assume sort of like a similar trajectory in terms of poverty reduction after the crisis, which is sort of like an optimistic assumption, it means that we think that Kenya can recover rather quickly. It might take up to like 5 years to basically reduce the number of the poor back to what they've been at the beginning or like just before the crisis. And so therefore, we argue and we think that it is really important to ensure that this does not take 5 years, but can go much more swiftly by putting in place proper mitigation and recovery measures, for example, like a well-targeted cash transfer program.
And moving on now, 2 years after construction kicked off, South Africa's Kangas wind farm has now been commissioned to generate energy for commercial purposes. Now, this is despite the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought all construction work to a standstill for several months. Lekela is the main investor and project manager for this wind farm that's located on the Northern Cape. Here's Angelo Coppola with more on that story.
This was the first completed project in the fourth round of the South African government's renewable energy program, and it came in at $220 million. It will generate enough renewable energy per year to power up 154,000 homes.
The grid connection between our project and Eskom's grid has been what we call self-built, so we build it ourselves. Typically in the past it has been Eskom doing this. And here, in this particular project, we have been doing that in order to make sure that we de-risk the project, can do it ourselves. Of course, we have the the knowledge in-house to do that. And that helped us being very fast in the implementation of the project.
The project is managed by Lekela, an international firm that has built up a team of local specialists to manage the entire build and operate process.
We split the contract into the wind turbine and generator on one side, and then what we call the balance of plant on the other side. And the reason for doing that is, you can do this in South Africa simply because you have the necessary companies who have the necessary expertise to do it.
One of the key parts of the construction process in the past was that most of the high-tech equipment for the turbines was imported. This negatively affected the local content requirement imposed by Eskom.
This time we made sure that the transformers, which is really a critical part of a wind turbine, are actually procured in local factories here in South Africa. And that pushed that percentage to 49%. So the only things currently which are outside of Africa, procured outside of Africa, is really the blades and the nacelles.
This is a long-term project, anything between 20 and 25 years, and it's important for Lekela to show their commitment.
And so the ED, economic development, and the SED, the socio-economic development for Africa, is very, very important and for us in order to make sure that we get actually a social license to operate within the community.
With the construction phase of the project now out of the way, it's down to the long-term provision of energy onto that Eskom grid. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Global Business Africa. We're going to take a short break now, still to come. The U.S. Treasury Department extends deadlines for TikTok's a Chinese parent company to sell its U.S. operations to December 4th. And airports and airlines desperate for revenue as medics discourage travel for Thanksgiving.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
The actors, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Now here's a quick recap of other headlines at this hour. At least 14 formal miners have been trapped underground in Zimbabwe after a shaft collapsed in a disused gold mine. Now the incident occurred late on Wednesday in the town of Bindura, north of the capital Harare. The miners were working inside the Rand gold mine when a shaft caved in. 6 miners have been pulled from the rubble and taken to hospital. Rescue efforts are still ongoing. And Burkina Faso's incumbent president, Roch Kabore, has won re-election. In preliminary results released on Thursday, the Electoral Commission announced him as the winner with nearly 58% of the vote. His 2 closest rivals, Zephirin Diabre and Eddie Komboigo, got about 12 and 15% of the vote, respectively. And Ethiopia's federal government forces have begun their final offensive in the Tigray region. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says the assault is aimed at capturing the perpetrators and it should be done with minimum civilian casualties. Now, this final offensive comes after a 72-hour ultimatum for the Tigrayan forces to surrender expired. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, for some news outside of the African continent, the U.S. Treasury Department has extended a deadline for TikTok's Chinese parent company to sell its U.S. operations until December 4th. Now, the Treasury Department says it has granted the extension because authorities need more time to review a revised submission by ByteDance. President Donald Trump has threatened to ban TikTok over national security concerns. The White House has said that TikTok must become an American firm controlled by American investors in order to avert a ban. The app has around 100 million active users in the U.S. Meanwhile, Alibaba's online payment platform, Alipay, has been listed amongst the apps that are banned in India. China's ambassador to India has lashed out at the move, echoing much of the foreign ministry's comments. Now, India had previously pulled 59 Chinese apps, including TikTok, from its domestic market. Over 100 more were banned in September.
China firmly opposes these measures, which obviously violated the market principle as well as the WTO guidelines. They also seriously damage the legitimate rights and the interest of Chinese enterprises. Chinese enterprises have always been required to carry out cooperation in line with international rules and regulations. The Indian government has the responsibility to safeguard the legitimate rights and the interest of international investors, including Chinese enterprises, in accordance with the market principles. Mutual benefit is the essence of the China-India economic and trade cooperation. India should correct this discriminatory action immediately to avoid further harm to bilateral cooperation.
Now, China has built nearly 700,000 5G base stations, and the number of devices connecting to the network exceeds 160 million. In southwest China's Chengdu, hundreds of business insiders have gathered to discuss better ways to apply the technology to industry. Meng Qingchang reports.
China is ramping up deployment of 5G infrastructure. Experts predict the economic output of 5G-driven businesses will hit about $3.5 trillion in the next 5 years. But that also depends on efforts to integrate 5G into more complex industrial processes.
The biggest challenge of integrating 5G technology into industries is to find ways to improve the industrial digitalization. Only by doing so can we apply the advantages of 5G, like low latency and high bandwidth, onto industries and help unleash their huge growth potential.
At a conference held in southwest China's Chengdu, business insiders are calling for diversifying application scenarios. TD Tech is a joint venture between Nokia Siemens Networks and Huawei Technologies. The company has come up with wireless technologies in areas ranging from smart transportation and manufacturing to public security.
With the introduction of 5G, we're able to control trains with wireless communication and achieve unmanned driving. It allows us to reduce train intervals from the previous 300 seconds to the current 90 seconds, or even 70 seconds in the future. There are now 5 times more trains running in our traffic system than before.
China Mobile is the world's largest operator in terms of subscribers. The carrier added 44 million 5G subscribers in third quarter of 2020. However, its researchers say more efforts are needed to benefit industries.
Currently, we have over 100 million 5G subscribers, the highest number across the world. We hope that 5G network and terminals serve various industries. However, as 5G is a new technology, it's still not fully developed and keeps evolving all the time.
China has over 400 5G innovation applications, and there are over 600 5G plus industrial internet projects under construction. The ongoing initiatives are set to bring 5G closer to its optimal use in industries. Meng Qingsheng, CGTN, Chengdu, Sichuan Province.
Well, let's head to the U.S. now, where millions of Americans are ignoring health advice to avoid flying over the Thanksgiving holiday. Now, the country's top immunologist says air travel threatens to worsen soaring COVID-19 cases, but airlines and airports already decimated by the pandemic are desperate for even a fraction of the revenue that the busiest travel period of the year generates. Here's Owen Fairclough reporting from Washington, D.C.
Washington's Reagan Airport should be bustling at this time of year, but this is a Thanksgiving holiday like no other.
Please also wash your hands frequently and practice social distancing.
Even though COVID-19 cases are soaring in the US, millions are defying advice from the Centers for Disease Control to avoid traveling.
I do feel guilty, and I feel like maybe it's going to come to an end.
I've been in quarantine since March. I've been following all the guidelines, but we just want to be with family at this point and still respecting the CDC guidelines, the 6 feet, the mask. Again, it's not listening to them, but at the same time, we have our needs too.
But if there are ethical dilemmas for passengers, airlines are under huge pressure to keep flying after furloughing tens of thousands of staff and requiring a government bailout just to stay in business.
And even though it's recovered somewhat since then, it's astonishing how little air traffic there is at what is normally a busy airport. So airlines are counting on this Thanksgiving period to try to stem some of those enormous losses.
Some airlines have increased flights to cater for the largest number of passengers since the pandemic began to sweep the US, bringing some relief to Washington's Airport Authority, whose revenue sank nearly 40% in the first 9 months of the year.
Passenger activity drives revenue. So if you look around and you don't see the same type of passenger activity that you normally would see, you can expect revenue to follow suit.
And the airline industry regulator warns that even a bump in revenues and the prospect of mass vaccinations may be too late to prevent some carriers from bankruptcy. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
And heading to France now, where economic activity during the second COVID-19 lockdown fell by about 10%. That's compared to 30% during the first effort. Now, according to the French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire, the minister talked about how and when France will exit its current nationwide confinement. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
Thierry Leroux runs a toy shop in central Paris. When the second lockdown came in, he had to adapt once again, taking up new schemes like click and collect.
It was very hard to put in place because it was an emergency. It was the price to pay, 15 days of implementation to update our website. Now it's working, so let's keep our fingers crossed that it will continue because it's not an insignificant addition.
But in Tuesday's speech to the nation about the COVID-19 restrictions, the French president said non-essential shops like Thierry's can reopen from November the 28th.
I'm not euphoric when I calculate how much we've lost since the start of the Christmas season, because the season doesn't start in December, but at the end of October. And when we see that we've achieved between 25 and 30% of the usual turnover, we realise how much we've lost, which will not be recouped in December.
As the situation in France starts to improve, Emmanuel Macron laid out the government's path for how and when the country will exit lockdown. But it didn't go far enough for some people.
What I miss is not being able to travel abroad. It is a little oppressive to be deprived of my freedoms.
The government document you have to carry at all times, it's tiresome, it's useless. People are outside all the time. That's what bothers us a little bit, because we feel watched.
I always spend Christmas with my mother, and there's no way I'd leave her alone. I would have managed to find a way to see her anyway. Maybe with a medical certificate, as she's 87 years old. It's essential for me to have my family at Christmas.
Despite the optimism on the horizon, it remains a bleak outlook for the hospitality sector, which was hoping for concessions over the winter holidays. Cafes, bars and restaurants will have to stay closed through mid-January.
The growth forecast is at 6% for 2021, meaning that it takes into account the shock of this second lockdown on the French economy. I will not make any predictions on unemployment, but I feel like the spirit of defeat has taken over many political leaders. Unlike them, I believe in the spirit of resistance, and I think our economy has the capacity to get back on its feet.
If the daily numbers of new cases are around 5,000, then confinement measures will be lifted in mid-December. But it won't be a total relaxation of all restrictions, as a 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. curfew will then replace the lockdown.
Now, Germany is set to extend a partial shutdown into December in an effort to further reduce the rate of coronavirus infections ahead of the Christmas holiday. Chancellor Angela Merkel and the country's 16 state governors made the decision on Wednesday. The shutdown began on November 2nd, closing restaurants, bars and sports and leisure facilities, but leaving schools, shops and hair salons open. It was initially slated to last about 4 weeks. Now, Merkel says the existing measures have succeeded in halting an upsurge in new cases, though they remain high. Now, Germany reported 410 COVID-19 deaths on Wednesday, the highest single-day tally so far. Meanwhile, businesses in the UK hospitality sector clawed back more than $1 billion in the Eat Out to Help Out scheme that ran over the summer. Now, the government's initiative was designed to boost the economy after the first national lockdown, and it allowed pubs and restaurants to offer heavily discounted meals on Mondays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays in August. Here's Juliet Mann reporting.
It's coffee and cake to go only. But staff here are grateful for any business in this lockdown. They've extended the UK government's half-price scheme to keep customers sweet.
Help Out scheme not only helped the businesses, it's helped the employees. We keep all employees employed and busy, so it was amazing.
The scheme encouraged people to go out again with a back-to-normal mindset. New figures show businesses have claimed $1.1 billion through the initiative, providing discounts for more than 160 million meals in some 50,000 restaurants, pubs and cafes. Now, again having closed their doors, restaurateurs hope for subsidy salvation.
It's going to be 5-6 months. It needs to be introduced again because we are struggling now again.
Up and down this high street, restaurants are closed. This pizza joint is only open for takeaway. And this is a brand new restaurant. There should be diners outside here, but it was forced to close after only 2 weeks because of the second lockdown. It's dealt a real business blow to a struggling sector. You know, over the summer, Eat Out to Help Out was a short order lifeline, but critics say that maybe Britain's like a bargain more than they fear the pandemic. A study from the University of Warwick analysed the causal impact of Eat Out to Help Out on COVID-19 clusters. It found the scheme drove up infections while offering only short-lived economic benefits.
Essentially what the scheme did was concentrate a lot of restaurant dining activity within a few days within the week, and that is completely contrary any sort of ideas of maintaining social distance and trying to make sure that few households meet in an environment that already at the time was conceived to be risky for infections. So it was in that sense a policy own goal.
The UK Finance Minister, Chancellor Sunak, says he has no regrets about the scheme because it helped 2 million people in the hospitality sector get back to work. He's hinted that it may be brought back early next year to boost the economy again. Juliet Mann, CGTN, London.
Well, let's shift focus now and take a look at commodity markets today. Signs of growing supplies in the oil market saw prices slipping from 7-month highs. Brent futures had, of course, risen to nearly $50 a barrel this week after 3 companies announced progress on vaccines. But traders say today's fall shows that bearish concerns still remain in the oil market. And gold's safe haven appeal was boosted today after grim U.S. jobs numbers did help to cast some doubt over a quick economic recovery globally. Prices climbed just slightly today. Meanwhile, after rising past $2,000, cocoa futures have retreated. That's even as news broke that Europe will be easing its COVID-19 restrictions in certain areas. And that, of course, revived some hope that cocoa demand will rise again. Well, let's take a short break, still coming up on the show. Uganda's interstate buses resume operations, but traffic is still worryingly low.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, let's head to Tunisia now. The country is treating the importation of waste from Italy as an ecological terrorism. Now, a complaint was submitted to the Judicial Counter-Terrorism Division by a group of NGOs based in the country. The case sparked widespread national outrage and resulted in the dismissal of the Director General of the National Waste Management Agency. Here's CGTN's Anand Shaushi with the details.
The Green Tunisia network, which brings together more than 100 active NGOs, threatened to file a complaint before the International Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights in the case of waste imported from Italy.
This is a national security issue. The Italian state has violated the sovereignty of Tunisia's national territory, given that this activity is harmful to the environment and human health.
Environmental experts explained that the Tunisian company annually imports nearly 120,000 tons of waste from Italy and receives 48 euros for each ton. Activists accuse the Environment Department, as well as the Italian and the Tunisian companies, of ecological terrorism.
The Tunisian company which is involved in this scandal did not act on its own. It has Italian partners and Tunisian state officials who turned a blind eye to this unprecedented environmental catastrophe. All people who authorize the import of waste from Italy will be held to account.
The Minister of Environment and Local Affairs informed the head of state that he ordered an investigation into the scandal. Authorities declared that 70 containers of waste have been sealed, pending the return to Italy, while 212 containers are still at the port of Sousse.
The export from the port in Italy was made with fake documents because the Tunisian importing company declared the containers were full of recyclable plastic waste, which is not true. The investigation is underway. The ministry did not grant any authorization. It will take all appropriate legal measures to address this kind of abuse.
Tunisia is a signatory to several international waste conventions. They are mainly the Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Wastes and their Disposal, and the Bamako Convention on the Ban on the Import into Africa of Hazardous Wastes and on the Control of Transboundary Movements and Management of Hazardous Wastes within Africa.
The Tunisian law clearly regulates the field of waste disposal. Therefore, it is strictly prohibited to import hazardous waste into the North African state.
Environmental activists hope that the case will not be treated and classified as an ordinary customs offense. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, interstate buses resumed operations between Uganda and the various neighboring countries after the government eased restrictions on transport. But while that has opened opportunities for traders to resume cross-border activities, the low turnout of passengers is already worrying bus operators. Here's Leon Senyange reporting from Kampala.
Kampala has been Milka Kumalija's go-to destination. She trades in clothes in the Ugandan capital, then sells them back home in Mwanza, Tanzania. But the past 7 months have been tough on Milka, who often crosses the border into Uganda on business. The COVID-19 outbreak and the subsequent closure of the Uganda-Tanzania border in March put the brakes on transport, and Milka's business has ground to a virtual halt ever since.
We have been affected in business because of COVID-19. Business has not been moving normally. I almost went back to zero. Everything was down.
With buses clear to resume normal operations this month, Milka is eager to trade again.
It is true that we are back, but we are facing challenges. For instance, transportation problems starting from the border and following up to get the identification cards. It's a challenge because the price is too high and we use a lot of money.
After a long day of work, this is her only opportunity to catch a bus back to Tanzania this week. There used to be buses from this terminal heading to Tanzania every day, but with the limited number of passengers now, the trips have been reduced to only twice a week. All trips are now subject to COVID-19 standard operating procedures. Passengers are checked with temperature guns and all must wear masks on board. COVID certificates are a must at the border points. Government also requires the buses to carry only half their capacity.
We should have closed yesterday because we are not doing any business. But we are forced to operate in two losses. We are injecting more money in business purposely to keep the passengers.
About 200 passengers have traveled this month alone. That often is the number of travelers in a week. Bus operators are pessimistic and don't believe the number will increase.
People can travel, but it looks like lately they are not interested. They are fearful. Others had started taking COVID tests. They would get the certificates, but after the recent violence, people got scared. So we aren't certain on how they will react to the situation.
It could be a struggle for the long-haul buses to stay on the road. For Milka, the opening has been a good chance to travel, hopefully with more back-and-forth trips in the coming days. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, before we leave you, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand dipping after data showed consumer price inflation in October rose. At some point, it traded as high as 15.28 rand per dollar. In Nigeria, the naira continues to depreciate significantly against the dollar, also crashing further at the black market to close at around 487 naira per dollar. Now, the CBN governor has seemingly pointed to the black market, saying that the Nigerian official exchange rate should not be determined by the rate at the parallel market. And that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thank you.